Two playoff hopefuls clash at Lumen Field. Who has the advantage as the Bills travel to Lumen Field to face the Seahawks? We're going to be breaking it all down here on Crossover Thursday on the Locked On Podcast Network.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, 12s and Bills fans. We've got a special Crossover Thursday edition coming your way. Locked On Seahawks, Locked On Bills. I'm Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast. Glad to be teaming up with Joe Marino, host of the Locked On Bills podcast. Got a massive game coming up on Sunday at Lumen Field. Two playoff hopefuls. The Seahawks finally snapping that losing streak with a dominant win over the Falcons, and the Bills taking care of business against the Titans. This episode is brought your way by our friends over at Prize Picks. Download the app and use the code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. It feels like, Joe, there has been a wide receiver traded every single day the last 2 weeks, and the Buffalo Bills were one of the teams that made one of those deals, bringing in Amari Cooper from the Cleveland Browns. And the early returns already look quite promising for Josh Allen's new number one target.
Yeah, it's definitely given this passing game some life. And I think the Bills' passing offense has been kind of streaky. They started off really good and then kind of fell into a slump against the Texans and Ravens and against the Jets. And then, of course, most recently against the Titans, the passing game really came alive. And I think you look at Amari Cooper as a big catalyst as to the reason why. Obviously, everyone knows the Bills traded away Stephon Diggs and leaned into a bunch of new faces around Josh Allen at wide receiver. And the only receiver on the team that caught a pass from him prior to this year was Khalil Shakir, a young player out of Boise State. And so he's a good slot player, but Amari Cooper changes the complexion of this passing offense where you have a guy that can go get you buckets, right? A true route technician that has been extremely productive throughout his 10 years in the NFL. And so that is a big deal for Buffalo as they try to find consistency and rhythm and efficiency with their overall passing operation. And then when you go from, Mac Hollins playing a high percentage of your snaps at wide receiver to Amari Cooper, the upgrade is a big deal. And so I think the Bills have kind of found their top four in the passing game in Cooper, in Khalil Shakir, and a rookie in Keon Coleman, their top pick in the draft, and then their first-round pick from last year, Dalton Kincaid. So it feels like it's coming together, but obviously Seattle is a team that I think is loaded with defensive talent and a very good defensive mind running the whole thing in Mike McDonald. And so it's going to be a good matchup to see kind of where this Bills passing offense is at on the road.
I'll dive into this later, but it almost sounds like these two teams, albeit different parts of their offense, Buffalo's been trying to find the consistency in the passing game. Seattle, I don't even want to say find consistency in the run game. Sometimes it's just been find the run game, like do it at all. There have been games where they just haven't done that. But both these teams, it still feels like there's a feeling out process that they are going through on the offensive side of the football. Now, defensively, Buffalo's had a number of games where they played really well. There's also been several games where they have given up a lot of points. And you and I were talking about this before the show specifically. There's one position group that looks like it could be pretty darn banged up heading into this game. And you're already missing Matt Milano, but the linebacker group, how does that impact what the Bills do if they're missing one or both of their stars at that position when they come out to Seattle this weekend?
Yeah, I think one of the huge storylines for the Buffalo Bills is going to be the availability of Terrell Bernard and Dorian Williams, their starting linebackers. Terrell Bernard has emerged as really a big-time impact playmaker for the defense. He's their team captain. They only have two team captains, Josh Allen and Terrell Bernard. He means a ton to this operation. And he couldn't finish the game against Tennessee with an ankle injury. And as far as the Wednesday practice, he was excused for personal reasons. So we don't really know what his status is as of the recording this podcast. And we'll see about Dorian Williams. It looks like he's probably going to be good to go. And so that's something to pay attention to the rest of the week here is the availability of those linebackers and if they can go. And if they can go, I think it's huge for Buffalo, obviously. I mean, you're talking about your starting linebackers, but especially against Seattle that I think has a lot of versatility with their playmakers. And, I think the linebackers in the NFL sometimes is a bit overlooked as a position that maybe people think doesn't have as much value. But when you can be able to play in space and cover and run and handle misdirection, it's huge. I mean, Seattle knows all about it. They had Bobby Wagner for a million years, and see the impact of a player like that And I think if the Bills have to reach into their depth at linebacker even further, like you mentioned, Milano out until sometime in December, that would be a problem. So fingers crossed on the Bills side of things that Terrell Bernard and Dorian Williams are good to go for Sunday.
When you look at this Bills team, now that we are 7 games into the season, what has been the biggest surprise up to this point in your mind? I mean, obviously Josh Allen has still played like Josh Allen, even with some of the receiver issues that he's had, making heroic throws when he's going out of bounds, chucking it 50 yards downfield, running the football into the end zone. But what have been the surprises so far that you've seen from this team that have maybe changed the complexion of what this team looked like going into this season and now heading into this key midseason matchup?
I think the low-hanging fruit here is probably that Josh Allen hasn't thrown an interception. Of every quarterback in the NFL that's had at least 40 attempts has thrown an interception. Well, Josh Allen's thrown the ball 189 times and hasn't thrown a pick. And, of course, he threw 18 of them last year. And it's the never-ending conversation with Josh Allen that I think is so much is missed within that because of the meaning, the timing of interceptions. And there's just so much that goes into it. He hasn't thrown one this year. That's the bottom line. The Bills offense has only turned the ball over twice all season long, and they were both lost fumbles. And so the Bills are taking care of the football. And when you take care of the football and you have a level of dynamic playmaking that exists within the Bills, I mean, that's a tough operation to deal with. And so Seattle's interesting because they took it away 3 times in week 1. They took it away 3 times last week against Atlanta, but then 1 turnover or 1 takeaway in the middle 5. And so I think the Bills' ability to take care of the football has probably been the most surprising thing for this overall team as they sit at 5-2 and hope to have that same fortune continue for a bunch more games.
And for the Seahawks, that's been the biggest surprise for them. And it's on a negative side is that they've had so many games. Mike McDonald is such an artist when it comes to generating pressure, creating confusing looks, and opening up opportunities for turnovers. And they just have not been there until the fourth quarter on Sunday in Atlanta. And suddenly they started coming in bunches, got 3 of them in a blink of an eye. So who knows if that means that that's a precursor for them to create turnovers in bunches the next couple games, and there's going to be some contagious effect there, or if it was just a one-off as it was in week 1 against the Denver Broncos. But the Bills are going to bring a lot of weapons. They're going to bring a really good, well-coached football team to Lumen Field, which is not the house of horrors that it used to be. The Seahawks have already lost 2 games there this year. They just haven't been able to maintain that home field advantage that they did during the Legion of Boom era. And we'll get to those Seahawks coming up next, but certainly the Buffalo Bills, 8 teams, and now the addition of Amari Cooper, maybe one more trade in the bag before the deadline to try to bolster that team. They are very much one of the contenders to try to dethrone the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC, and this will be a big game for them to stay on pace with the undefeated Chiefs. We'll get to the Seahawks coming up next, some key storylines heading into this key Week 8 matchup that's coming up next year on Crossover Thursday on the Locked On Podcast Network. This episode is brought your way by Z-Biotics Pre-Alcohol Probiotic Drink. It's the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Drink pre-alcohol for the best results. Make sure it's that first drink. Drink responsibly and pace yourself. Hydrate, get a good night's sleep, and enjoy tomorrow. You're going to wake up feeling refreshed and ready to take on the day. Go to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use Locked On NFL at checkout. Z-Biotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL at checkout for 15% off. Welcome to Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. This is Corbin Smith of Locked On Seahawks. Glad to be teaming up with Joe Marino of Locked On Bills as we take a deep dive into Sunday's matchup at Lumen Field between the first place Seahawks and the first place Buffalo Bills. All right, Joe, we talked about Buffalo and some of the inconsistencies that they have had, particularly on the offensive side of the football. I don't know if I want to use the word inconsistency with Seattle, because Geno Smith has been pretty darn consistent most of this season throwing the football, considering circumstances. He leads the league in passing yards right now, but the run game, which has just been so hit and miss when you've got a dynamic weapon like Ken Walker III, last week they were able to get him going, get some of that play action game going, but that has really been the storyline for about 4 or 5 weeks running. Is Ryan Grubb actually going to get that running game going and not just abandon it 1 or 2 drives in and just say, well, I'm going to run it like the Washington Huskies here. We're just going to sling the rock 55 times. That hasn't necessarily panned out for victories for the Seahawks this year.
Well, Corbin, I got plenty of specific questions that I'd like to ask you about Seattle, but I'd like to start here, and it's just basic vibe check, because I think Seattle's probably the most confusing team in the NFL to me. It's a team that I think is loaded with talent. They have prototypes all over the place. I don't really see a ton of deficiency on the roster. And they have a brand new coaching staff, which is interesting because of, like you mentioned, Ryan Grubb, very new to the NFL, and Mike McDonald, a young defensive mind that's now a head coach. But you look at the journey of the season for this team. They start off by winning 3 in a row. They beat the Broncos, Patriots, and Dolphins. And I wouldn't say that those are quality wins, right? 2 of those were narrow wins against the Broncos and Patriots, but they took care of their business and they got wins, which I think is a big deal for a team that has so much new in terms of the coaching staff and even some of the roster. Then they drop 3 in a row. They lose to the Lions. They lose to the Giants in Seattle. Everybody was surprised by that. And they lose the 49ers, and then they bounce back last week and beat the Falcons on the road by 20. So my question for you, Corbin, is who are the Seattle Seahawks?
I can't answer that for you at this point. I don't feel like the Seahawks themselves can probably answer that for you, because one week they'll look like last week in Atlanta. I think the Falcons are a really good football team. And the Seahawks made them look pedestrian in all 3 phases. They dominated that game from the outset. Geno Smith was slinging the pigskin. Ken Walker III, albeit with the flu, was running and catching passes like a madman. Before he went down with an injury, DK Metcalf was tearing it up. The defense got 3 turnovers. They sacked Cousins 3 times, which he's a tough quarterback to get sacks on because he gets the ball out so quick. But that was the type of game that tells you this could be a sleeper in the NFC that's wide open right now. This team could be dangerous. But then you go back to the Giants game a few weeks earlier, and they let Daniel Jones start off like 14 for 16 throwing the football. And it's just like, which team is this? It is truly a Jekyll and Hyde situation, and injuries have been part of that.
Yeah,
especially the Lions game. They had to move Draymond Jones back inside, and he lost some weight to play edge. So he was not equipped to play inside, but he had to because they had so many injuries. They've gotten those players back. Roy Robertson Harris, I think, is going to be a really nice addition that they made to this defense that's going to give them some more positional flexibility and allow them to mix and match guys a little bit more. But aside from the injuries, there's just been inconsistency with their run fits. The run defense has been the biggest problem. I am really encouraged, though. This is the first time I can say this, even when they've had stretches this year where they played okay against the run. I'm like, if the other team would have just gotten this block right here, they're probably giving up a 30-yard play. The second half against Atlanta, they really shut down Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier. 11 carries for 22 yards. They had 6 carries of 0 yards or negative yardage. And so you start to see this team really start to play the run the way that I anticipated. Byron Murphy II, the rookie, is a huge part of that. Getting him back healthy. The Seahawks are 4-0 when Byron Murphy II plays. And that may just be kind of a coincidence, but I don't think it is. He has been a catalyst for that front line, and he has been able to make things easier on their linebackers, who, quite frankly, have not played great most of this year. Tyrell Dodson, former Buffalo Bill, he's had his issues with run fits, but I thought he played a lot better in the second half on Sunday in Atlanta. So as far as who this team is, I still think we need a few more games to try to figure out what this team is, because I think they could be a contender. And then there's other games where I'm like, top 5 pick incoming. You just don't know what you're going to get with this team right now.
Well, it's certainly a ripe opportunity to go win that NFC West with the way that the Niners are looking and the Rams look like they're in the dumps. So I think Seattle's going to be in it all the way through. It's just a matter of, can they hit their stride and what does it look like when they kind of reach their peak? And I think it's to be expected, right? And everything is new with the coaching staff and a lot of new personnel. So I'm really curious to see how things normalize for Seattle. But it sounds like we're both pretty uncertain as to kind of what this team is at this point in time. Now, one thing that we do know is they like to throw the football. Seattle, the most pass-aggressive team in the NFL, is 67% pass rate, comfortably number 1 in the NFL. My question here is, what are your expectations for Sunday against the Bills, against a run defense that is shaky, mostly because the Bills just don't play heavy boxes. They give light boxes, they invite the run, and they concede a lot of rushing yards. Do you think this is the week they stay committed to it, potentially without DK Metcalf, or if he goes, I mean, would certainly be potentially a little bit not 100% DK Metcalf. So what are your expectations? Are they going to throw the ball all over the place, or are they going to try to run the ball?
I think they're going to try to do what they did this past week against Atlanta. And obviously every week you're going to have different game planning that you're going to have to do. But I think they're going to come out and they are going to try to get Ken Walker III the football frequently early. They're going to try to get that under center play action. That has been my biggest gripe with Ryan Grubb to this point. Geno Smith is a top 3 quarterback in the NFL at under center play action. He is dynamic with it. But that is one of the reasons it's been so frustrating. Like the Giants game, Ken Walker III had 5 carries the entire game, and he was healthy. That cannot happen. And Ryan Grubb took the blame for that afterward and said, hey, I just didn't get the job done. I had the calls. I didn't get the job done. He has been much more committed to the run game the last couple weeks. I think he is learning quickly that what he did at Washington is not going to work in the NFL. Yeah. Like some of those passing concepts will, but you can't throw the ball 88% of the time like they did against the New York Giants and expect that you are going to have success in the NFL. And Geno Smith has played really well considering the circumstance. The O-line is shaky. That continues to be a chronic thing for the Seattle Seahawks, even with the new coaching staff. O-line continues to be an issue. But I think they're going to come out trying to get that run game established. Not that they're going to come out and go run, but they are going to be committed to it. They're going to stick with it. And I think they're going to try to get that play action game going so that they can play into Geno Smith's greatest strengths. And I think you've got to when you look at what Buffalo has done this year. And if they're willing to play those light boxes, take the yardage they're giving you in the run game, and then see if you can loosen up the passing defense a little bit and take some of those shots. Even without DK Metcalf, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Tyler Lockett, still very good players. And then you've got Jake Bobo, who I think is a guy that can get the job done. He just hasn't had very many opportunities with the receivers that are in front of him. This can still be an offense that can move the ball through the air without Metcalf, though I would be predicting there's a really good chance DK is at least going to try to play in this football game.
I wanted to ask you about the offensive line and how it is adjusting. You kind of teased that a little bit in your answer there. Charles Cross certainly coming into his own at left tackle, but some new pieces in the middle there. Veteran in Laken Tomlinson, a veteran in Connor Williams coming off of an ACL tear. But I think the right side's where it really gets interesting, where, of course, Stone Forsythe has kind of had to be the guy at right tackle. And I think that's an interesting matchup with him against Greg Rousseau, who's really had a great season to this point in time. It feels like an advantage for the Bills, but collectively, I know what Jason Peters is back on the practice squad. Some shakiness to this offensive line. Like, where is it good, and where do you have some concerns?
I think Charles Cross has been solid. I would not back the PFF grades completely because I do think he's still had issues with power rushers this year. And we saw this in the Atlanta game. There was 3 straight plays on one of their drives where he got knocked back right into Geno Smith. But I think that he has made improvements as a run blocker. He's been more consistent in the pass blocking game. And I feel like Connor Williams is starting to find his stride now. I mean, the dude tore his ACL last December. Right. The fact that he was playing in week 1 was incredible, but he's starting to play like Connor Williams now. Laken Tomlinson's been decent in the run game. Pass protection, he's been a little better as of late. Not a strength in his game, but that side of the ball, that side of the line, it feels like he's solid. Right guard, Anthony Bradford's got 7 penalties. He's given it 4 sacks. It has been a disappointing second season, and a lot of fans are wondering why Christian Haynes is not playing at this point, more than a handful of snaps. I am in that committee too. I don't know why Haynes isn't playing. But the cool storyline for this team at right tackle, Stone Forsythe injured his hand, so they were down to their 4th stringer last week. Mike Jarrell, the 6th-round pick out of Findlay University, and he gave him a sack on Sunday, but he also had a phenomenal run block that opened up Ken Walker for a 20-yard run. He had a couple other really nice run blocks, had a pancake, held up pretty well in pass protection. He's a 95th percentile athlete at the tackle position. I expect that Mike Jarrell is going to be the one that is starting this week, unless George Fant returns from injured reserve, which they're saying there's a chance he might. But I would hedge bets that right now it's Mike Jarrell that is starting this game. He's going to be tested by Rousseau and his power. The Bills have a couple Epineza as well, can get after guys with power. This is going to be a different matchup than when he faced Matt Judon last week and Arnold Ebiketie, guys that are more predicated on athleticism, speed. He's going to have to show that he can handle that brute force. But this guy looks the part right now at the tackle position. So I'm curious to see what start number 2 looks like against a better opponent.
Last one I had for you, Corbin, is just about the defense, and kind of curious to get your takes on how it's coming together. I think it's an immensely talented group, especially with some of their D-line talent and their secondary talent. I mean, prototypes, athletic dudes, freaks all over the place. And so you got that plus Mike McDonald, a highly regarded defensive mind. What's going well? And I know you mentioned there's been some issues with the run defense, but just overall, what's your takes on the Seattle defense?
As far as what's going well, I love what they're doing with their pass rush. And Boye Mafe and Derek Hall, Mike McDonald said this on Monday that he thinks they both can be all-pro caliber players, and I do not disagree with that. I think Derek Hall actually has the most superstar potential in this entire roster. The guy this year has just come out in year 2, and he has been fantastic. Had a fumble return for a touchdown the other day. He has been dynamic, and Leonard Williams looked really good when they've moved him outside and inside. He's lived up to the contract that they've paid him. And this has all been without Uchenna Nwosu most of the season. If they can get Nwosu back by the end of the year, this edge rushing group is going to be an absolute monster. So that would be where I would go at as far as strengths for this defense. As far as the weaknesses, it's all about the run game. And it's been different issues. Run fit's not on point. Missed tackles, all kinds of issues with injuries along the defensive line. All those different things have kind of contributed to that, where they gave up 170-plus rushing yards in a 3-game losing streak. Last week, though, like I said, 22 rushing yards and 11 carries for the 2 running backs for the Falcons in the second half. It felt like that could be a turning point. Now, we'll see if it carries over to this game against Buffalo, and I would anticipate Buffalo is going to try to test that if they are game planning. Let's see if we can get this run game going and have a balanced offense, take advantage of a run defense that most this year has been pretty porous. All right, we're going to switch gears here now, moving away from storylines. We've got Seahawks, we've got Bills. We're going to be looking at keys to victory, and then we're also going to be doing our against the spread predictions. That's coming up next here on Crossover Thursday. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play from across the league, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Bet on everything from Ken Walker III scoring a rushing touchdown against the Bills, or Amari Cooper to be the first player in Sunday's game. Just throw in a $5 bet, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast. Glad to be teaming up with Joe Marino, host of Locked On Bills, as we gear up for Sunday's game between 2 playoff hopefuls at Lumen Field. Joe, let's get to our keys to victory, the most important thing that both teams must accomplish to win on Sunday. We'll start with the Buffalo Bills, who have been playing pretty darn good football. They now have their season at 5 victories. Where do you see this team needing to succeed? What are the keys to victory to go into Seattle and give the Seahawks a 3rd straight loss at Lumen Field?
Yeah, that'd be crazy, right? I have 3 things written down that I think are most important for the Bills on Sunday afternoon. Number 1 for me is that the Bills need to help their run defense. The best part of the Bills defense is probably their cornerbacks. Rasul Douglas, Taron Johnson's an all-pro slot corner, and then Christian Benford is an emerging star at the position, and they're outstanding. And the Bills structurally play defense a little bit differently than everyone else, where they will give you light boxes over and over and over again. And every once in a while, the Bills have these games where teams just run the ball all over them, and it's a problem. And again, they put a lot of stress on their front to be able to fit the run with only 6 and maybe sometimes 7, but never 8, right? You're never going to get a heavy box look for this Bills defense. And so since they're never willing to be +1 in the box, they can get creased from time to time. Well, who's good at taking advantage of creases? Ken Walker, right? So there's a lot of concern that I have in this game about the Bills' ability to contain a big play back like Ken Walker. And so if there ever was a week to roll down a safety or help your run defense with some run blitzes or some gap exchanges or some stunts, you got to be able to do that, because Ken Walker will run all over you if you don't. Number 2, I think the protection schemes offensively are going to be critical. This is a Seahawks defense that doesn't blitz much, but they get a ton of pressure. And the reason they do is because Mike McDonald is the master of the simulated pressure, right? The illusion of pressure, and then being able to rush 4, but not necessarily the 4 that you expect. It's a very, very good trendy way to play defense in the NFL, and Mike Macdonald is very much a catalyst for this. And I think one of the areas where the Bills offense has had some issues is with pass protection, and not pass protection through the lens of offensive linemen getting beat one-on-one, right? That doesn't happen that often for the Bills. Their protection schemes get them in trouble, where sometimes they don't know when to keep extra bodies in. They'll give you a 5-man protection and just tell Josh Allen to kind of figure it out with the free runners. They can be confused, and there's some communication breakdowns from time to time. And I think Mike Macdonald's the type of defensive mind that can stress your communication with your protection scheme. And so the Bills need to be ready to handle that, especially on the road in a very loud environment in Seattle, which gets me to number 3, is to be ready for a hostile environment. I know that maybe the Seahawks haven't had the same success at home that they typically enjoy, but it's still a tough place to go play football. It's loud, and not that the Bills offense in particular isn't equipped to playing in loud environments. They play in Kansas City all the time. I mean, it's not uncommon, but they went into Baltimore, and I thought that hostile environment didn't really lend itself well for the Bills to be sound offensively. And for as experienced as Josh Allen is in these big games and loud environments, like we mentioned, there's a lot of new around Josh Allen with the receiver core. And so I think that you better be ready for, I'm sure they're pumping the speakers in practice, and they got all their silent counts all figured out, but you can have great intentions, but when it comes down to it, being able to perform to your capacity in a situation like that is going to be stressed in Seattle. So for me, it's, you got to help your run defense somehow. You got to have your protection schemes shored up against a creative front. And then, of course, you got a tough assignment here in the Pacific Northwest in a loud environment like Lumen Field.
And I think this is Josh Allen's first time playing at Lumen Field. So it's always interesting to see how star quarterbacks handle that the first time that they play there, because it's still very loud. I'm not taking anything away from the fans as far as what the record shows. They still bring it every home game for the Seahawks. Yeah. But I'm going to piggyback off the pass protection stuff from your end, because when I look at this Seahawks defense, as I mentioned, to me, the strength of this unit is that front line and their ability to generate pressure, and then mixing in blitzes with Devin Witherspoon. The sim pressures where you drop one of your defensive linemen back and let Witherspoon come after the quarterback. They've got a lot of different moving parts they can use. Both their linebackers are capable of creating pressure on the quarterback as well. If there is a game where Mike Macdonald really needs to open up that sim pressure playbook, this is the one that I would start to do that. Because to be honest with you, Joe, there have been several games this year where I've gone back and watched the tape, and you could count on under one hand the number of sim pressures that they had. There's not been something they've done a lot. And I think some of it's been because their edge rushers in particular have been so darn effective getting after the quarterback. They haven't had to do that as much. But I think in this game, you've got to give Josh Allen some different looks. He hasn't thrown an interception this year. Historically, though, he's had issues with that. Can you find a way to coax a turnover or two with some confusing looks, mixing in some of those pressures? And then when you do get pressure on him, you cannot let him get outside of the pocket consistently. He's going to do it occasionally, but this is a game where Boye Mafe, Derek Hall, Draymond Jones, you've got to be guarded with your pass rush and make sure that you're not giving Josh Allen those big lanes to run at the pocket or get outside. You have to limit the extended plays somehow. That is going to be a huge key for them. And on offense, you mentioned Ken Walker III. I'm feeding him early and often, both in the running game and the passing game. I think that he opens up their passing game when they get him involved a little bit as a receiver. But I mostly want to get that run game going because, look, this Seahawks offense is on a different level when they are able to run under center play action because of the receivers they have, even without DK Metcalf. Geno Smith is so proficient in that game, and it feels like last week that Ryan Grubb finally got the hint. I need to do this more. We got to get the run game going, get some of that under center action so that we are able to open up our passing game. I think in this game, it's going to be crucial for them not only to run the ball, but also be able to get it. I'm going to say this right now. I want to see 10 play action plays minimum this game. Let Geno Smith feed off the run game and get some of those opportunities downfield. I think that's where the shot plays could come into play at some point against this Bills defense. If you can run the ball effectively and get some of that play action, I think if they can do that on their home field, they've got a good chance to get the victory here. Speaking of that, let's get to the spread. The Bills are coming into this game, Joe, as a 3-point favorite on the road. They do have the better record. It's understandable. But looking at that spread going into this game, what are your vibes as far as whether or not the Bills can cover that coming into a hostile environment against the Seahawks team that now is feeling a lot better than they did a week ago?
I was surprised when I saw that the Bills were 3-point favorites in this game. The Bills obviously have the capacity to beat any team, and I think they should go in with expectations of being able to win. I just feel like there are some matchup challenges that exist with Seattle if they do choose to stay committed to the run game, and then what that does open up for their down the field passing. The Bills are typically very good at eliminating explosives down the field. But obviously when you can run the ball like that and you maybe do force some of those safeties to cheat up, you do have a good vertical passer in Geno Smith with good vertical receivers. And so I think there are some things here that give me pause, but obviously the Bills have a good offense with Josh Allen and are very potent themselves. And so, if we have a track meet here, who gets on top of it, I think there's going to be points. I think that's right. What I come away thinking is that this will be a high scoring game with, I think, matchup problems on both sides. But for the Bills to be 3-point road favorites, honestly, my reaction to that is I'm a little bit surprised.
Yeah, I actually think that this is a game that I would have near even. I think these two teams right now, especially with a few of the injuries that both teams have had, I feel like this is a very even matchup on paper. Different strengths, obviously, but I think the Seahawks are going to cover that 3-point underdog spread. I'm not saying they're going to win, but I could see this being a game where Buffalo kicks a field goal in the final seconds to win by 2 or something, because I just have a feeling this is going to be one of those. I'm with you. I think it's a high-scoring affair that I think is back and forth and really comes down to who's got the ball last. There might be a 2-point conversion thrown in there as well.
Sure.
That messes with that spread. But I think that this is going to be a very close game. This is one that I had circled before the season. And honestly, adding Amari Cooper to the mix now just puts more intrigue here. The Seahawks are hoping to have Riq Woolen back to be able to defend him along with Devin Witherspoon. So this has a chance to be an absolute barn burner. I can't wait to watch.
Yeah, I think you got the right vibe, Corbin. I think this is going to be a tight football game. There's going to be a decisive play or two at the end, and the 12s and Bills Mafia will be white knuckles the entire time. I'm sure of it.
And I've seen plenty of Bills Mafia out here in Seattle. I was driving in downtown on Monday and got to see a few of the Bills clubs that are in the city. So they're already ready to go for Sunday. This should be a fun one. I'm Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast. You can follow me at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Joe Marino at the Joe Marino on X as well. Make sure to listen into Locked On Seahawks and Locked On Bills on our Friday shows as we have our final tune-up heading into Sunday's big contest at Lumen Field. Thanks for listening in and enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Go Hawks, go Bills.